The bookseller of Salzburg. There are certain evenings in Salzburg that seem to belong to another century. Not because anything extraordinary happens, not because the city suddenly changes, but because the rain arrives at exactly the right moment. The streets grow quiet, the river darkens beneath the bridges, the last tourists disappear into hotels and cafes, and the old city slowly returns to itself. On one such November evening, a warm yellow light glowed behind the window of a small bookstore tucked between the stone buildings near the river. Most people walked past without noticing it. They were hurrying home, thinking about dinner, thinking about tomorrow, thinking about all the unfinished things waiting for them. But if they had stopped for just a moment, if they had looked through the rain-speckled glass, they would have seen thousands of books resting quietly on wooden shelves. Travel books, history books, poetry, novels, atlases, forgotten stories. Entire lives waiting patiently between covers, and among them moved a woman named Margit, 67 years old, gray hair cut short, calm eyes, the kind of face that immediately made people feel welcome. She had spent more than 3 decades inside this bookstore, 31 years officially, but if you counted the years she spent here as a child helping her mother after school, the number was much larger. In many ways, she had grown up among these shelves. The books had watched her become an adult, watched her leave, watched her return, watched entire seasons of her life pass by. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Inside, the final customer of the evening stood near the front counter. An older man in a dark coat, a scarf the color of pine forests after rain. In his hands he carried a thick book about the rivers of Central Europe. He had spent nearly 40 minutes examining it before making his decision. Margit appreciated people like that, people who chose books carefully, people who intended to read every page. The man placed the book on the counter. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The shop did not require constant conversation. Silence lived comfortably here. It always had. Finally, the man smiled. "Good evening, Margit. Good evening." The purchase was completed. The book disappeared into a canvas bag. The old man adjusted his scarf, opened the door. The bell above it rang once. A small, clear sound. Then the door closed, and the bookstore became quiet, not empty, not lonely, simply quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in places where stories have lived for generations. Margit stood behind the counter listening to the rain, to the old wooden floor settling beneath its own weight, to the distant sound of a tram crossing the far side of the city. Every evening sounded slightly different, yet every evening felt familiar, like hearing a beloved song played softly from another room. She turned off the lamp near the history section, then another beside the travel shelves. Golden pools of light disappeared one by one. The bookstore grew darker, warmer, more intimate. the smell of paper became more noticeable. Paper has its own weather. Old paper smells different from new paper. Travel books smell different from novels. Some books even carry faint traces of places they have visited. A little dust from another country, a hint of tobacco from decades ago, the memory of a house that no longer exists. Margit had always believed that books remembered things. Not literally, not in any magical sense, but somehow they carried pieces of the lives that passed through them. And after 31 years in the same bookstore, she trusted that feeling more than most people would understand. The rain continued falling outside, softly, steadily, the kind of rain that seemed content to remain until morning. Margit walked slowly between the shelves. One lamp remained lit near the front counter. Another glowed faintly beside the history section. The rest of the bookstore rested in shadow. She liked it that way. At night the shelves felt different, older somehow, more mysterious, as though the books became quieter after dark. Margit stopped beside a small wooden cart waiting to be organized. Several books remained there from earlier in the day, returns, special orders, a few recent arrivals, nothing unusual, at least not at first. She picked up a worn blue novel. The cover showed signs of age. The corners were softened by time. Many back room. She carried it carefully to the counter and sat down. The folded note remained beside her. Waiting, she remembered her mother finding objects inside books as well. Years ago, when Margit was still a child, every discovery had felt like treasure. An old photograph, a postcard, a ticket from another country. Her mother never threw such things away. Instead, she kept them inside a small wooden box. A box still sitting somewhere in Margit's apartment, filled with tiny forgotten fragments of strangers' lives. The thought made her smile. The city outside continued settling into the night. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The river flowed through the darkness beyond the old streets. And somewhere beneath the clouds, hidden from view, the mountains watched silently over Salzburg. Margit took another sip of tea, then carefully folded the note once more. Tomorrow she would place it inside the wooden box, alongside the photographs, the train tickets, the postcards, the other forgotten memories, a small collection of stories that no longer belonged to anyone, and yet somehow still belonged to the books that had carried them here. She switched off another lamp. The bookstore grew darker. Only the front light remained. Its warm glow stretched across the counter, across the folded note, across the shelves beyond. For a moment she stood completely still, listening to the rain, to the old building, to the quiet breathing of a bookstore that had spent generations collecting stories, some printed, some remembered, and some hidden carefully between the pages. The next morning arrived quietly. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. Thin clouds drifted above Salzburg. The streets still glistened from the night as weather. Margit unlocked the bookstore at exactly 8 o'clock, as always. The old key turned with a familiar click. The bell above the door gave a small greeting as she entered. Some habits become so familiar that they feel permanent. Opening the bookstore was one of them. The scent of paper welcomed her immediately. She switched on the lamps. One by one, warm pools of light appeared throughout the room. Soon the bookstore felt awake again, ready for another day. The first customer arrived 20 minutes later. An elderly woman named Frau Schneider. She visited almost every Tuesday, always at the same time, always wearing a blue coat, always carrying the same canvas shopping bag. Margit knew exactly where she would go, the poetry section. Every week, without exception, some customers searched for books. Others returned to old friends. Frau Schneider belonged to the second group. She spent nearly half an hour among the poetry shelves, reading, thinking, smiling occasionally. Eventually, she approached the counter carrying a thin collection of poems. "Good morning, Margit. Good morning. I told myself I wouldn't buy another book this week." Margit smiled. "You say that every week. So do you." Both women laughed. The purchase was completed. The book disappeared into the canvas bag. A few minutes later, she was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender. The bookstore grew quiet again. Margit always enjoyed watching people choose books. Every person had a different method. Some knew exactly what they wanted. Some wandered for an hour. Some read every description. Others trusted instinct. A bookstore revealed surprising things about people. Around midday, a young university student entered. Margit recognized him immediately. He had been visiting for almost 3 years, always studying history, always carrying too many notebooks. Today he looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. Exams? Margit asked. The student laughed. How did you know? You have the same expression every semester. He nodded. Fair. He purchased a biography. Not a textbook, not a study guide. A biography. That surprised her, taking a break from history. No, he smiled, still studying history. Then he tapped the cover. Just a different kind. Margit liked that answer. History lived in many places, not only in wars and governments, not only in famous events. Sometimes history lived inside ordinary lives, inside letters, inside photographs, inside bookstores. The afternoon passed peacefully. Customers arrived, customers left. The bell rang, then rang again. The city moved through another ordinary day. And ordinary days, Margit had learned, were often the most important. Years later, people rarely remembered specific Tuesdays. Yet somehow those Tuesdays became entire lives. A conversation here, a recommendation there, a smile, a greeting. Tiny moments that quietly shaped everything around them. Late in the afternoon, a man entered carrying a book, not to buy, to return. Margit recognized the title immediately. She had recommended it 6 months earlier. The man placed it carefully on the counter. I finished it, and he considered the question for several seconds, then smiled. It made me call my brother. Margit blinked. The answer surprised her. It had been 8 years. He looked down briefly. 8 years since we spoke. The bookstore suddenly felt quieter. The man gently tapped the cover. This reminded me that life is shorter than we think. Margit nodded. Sometimes books arrived exactly when they were needed, not because they contained answers, because they helped people ask better questions. The man thanked her and laughed. The bell rang softly, the door closed, and once again the bookstore settled into silence. Margit remained behind the counter for a moment, thinking. 31 years, thousands of books sold, thousands of recommendations, most forgotten. Yet every now and then she discovered that a book had traveled much farther than expected. Far beyond the bookstore, far beyond the shelves, far beyond the simple act of buying it. Outside, evening slowly approached. The light faded behind the old buildings. The river reflected the colors of the sky, and somewhere beyond the city, hidden by distance and clouds, the mountains stood patiently as they always had. Margit looked around the bookstore, at the shelves, at the books, at the lives quietly passing through them. Then she smiled. Tomorrow new customers would arrive. New conversations would begin. New stories would enter the bookstore. But for now, this day was enough. A good day. The kind of day that rarely appears in history books, yet somehow matters just as much. The bookstore closed a little earlier than usual that evening. The sky above Salzburg had turned clear for the first time in days. The rain clouds had drifted away. A pale orange sunset lingered beyond the rooftops. Margit stood behind the counter holding a small brass key. The same key she had carried for years. The same key that opened the bookstore every morning. Its edges were worn smooth, polished by time, polished by use, polished by habit. She turned it gently between her fingers and remembered another key. Many years ago, she had been 26, still learning, still uncertain, still believing that adults always knew exactly what they were doing. Her mother had called her into the bookstore after closing. The shelves stood quietly in the fading evening light, almost exactly as they did now. Without saying much, her mother placed a small brass key into her hand. Margit remembered staring at it, confused. "What is this?" Her mother smiled. "The spare key." Margit laughed. "Why are you giving it to me?" Instead of answering immediately, her mother looked around the bookstore, at the shelves, at the counter, at the old wooden floor, at the thousands of books resting in silence. Then she said something Margit never forgot, because one day this place will belong to you. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The idea seemed impossible. The bookstore had always belonged to her mother, just as the mountains belonged to Salzburg. Just as the river belonged to the city, some things felt permanent, until they weren't. That night Margit carried the key home. She kept it beside her bed. For weeks she looked at it every morning, not because it was valuable, because of what it represented. Responsibility, trust. A future she had never seriously imagined. Outside the bookstore, evening deepened. A bicycle passed along the street. A distant church bell echoed across the city. Margit smiled at the memory. Years later, she still carried that same key, the original one. Her mother's key, the key that had opened the bookstore through countless mornings. Winter mornings, spring mornings, busy mornings, quiet mornings. Thousands of them. She slipped it carefully into her pocket, then switched off the final lamp. The bookstore darkened. The shelves disappeared into shadow. The day was finished. Tomorrow another would begin, just as it always had, and just as her mother once knew it would. The bell above the door rang softly as Margit stepped outside. Then the door closed, and the bookstore waited patiently for morning. The air outside felt different after the rain, cleaner, colder, quieter. Margit paused for a moment beside the bookstore door. The street glistened beneath the lamps. Reflections stretched across the wet stones like small rivers of gold. She always enjoyed this part of the evening, the transition, the moment between work and home. For many years she had walked the same route through Salzburg. Never exactly the same, yet always familiar. The city changed with the seasons. Summer filled the streets with voices. Winter filled them with silence. Autumn occupied a place somewhere between the two. Tonight the old city felt almost deserted. Most windows glowed warmly against the darkness. People were eating dinner, talking with family, watching television, living ordinary lives. Margit began walking toward the river. Her footsteps echoed softly across the pavement. The river was one of the reasons she never left Salzburg permanently. She had tried years ago. There had been time spent in Vienna, a short period in France, several months in Hamburg. Interesting places, beautiful places, but none of them felt quite right. Eventually, she always found herself thinking about Salzburg, about the mountains, about the river, about the narrow streets she knew so well. Home is a difficult thing to explain. Sometimes it is not the place where you were born. Sometimes it is simply the place that continues calling you back. The river flowed quietly beside the old stone embankment, dark water carrying reflections downstream. Margit stopped near the bridge. This had been one of her mother's favorite places. As a child, she often stood here holding her mother's hand, watching the current, watching the lights, watching the city settle into evening. Back then, she believed rivers were alive, not in a scientific sense, in a storytelling sense, as though they remembered every person who had stood beside them. Every conversation, every goodbye, every promise. She smiled at the thought. Perhaps books had taught her to think that way, or perhaps her mother had. A cool breeze moved through the street. Somewhere in the distance a church bell rang 9 times. The sound drifted through the night, slowly fading. Margit continued walking. A small bakery stood on the corner ahead, closed now, dark inside. Yet she could almost imagine the smell of fresh bread waiting for tomorrow morning. There were places in every city that became part of a person's life, not because anything extraordinary happened there, because they were always there. Reliable, familiar, constant. The bakery, the bridge, the bookstore, the river, tiny landmarks in the map of an ordinary life. The older Margit became, the more she appreciated such things. People spend years searching for remarkable moments, yet happiness often hides inside ordinary ones. A warm light in a window, a familiar street, a friendly greeting, a book waiting on a shelf. Simple things, easy to overlook, easy to forget, yet somehow they become the memories that stay longest. Above the city, the clouds slowly drifted apart. For the first time all evening, a few stars appeared. Margit looked up, then smiled. Tomorrow would probably be clear. A good day for walking, a good day for books, a good day for stories. And with that thought, she continued home through the quiet streets of Salzburg. By the time Margit reached her apartment building, the city had become almost completely quiet. Only a few windows remained lit. Only a few distant sounds drifted through the night. The old building stood above a narrow street not far from the river. It was not large, it was not impressive, but it had been home for many years. Margit climbed the familiar staircase. The wooden steps creaked softly beneath her feet. Every step carried a memory, some recent, some decades old. At the top floor, she unlocked her door. The apartment greeted her with silence. Comfortable silence, the kind that comes from familiarity. A small lamp near the window illuminated the room. Books stood on shelves here as well. Not as many as in the bookstore, but enough. There was a comfortable chair beside the window. A small wooden table, several framed photographs. A clock that ticked quietly. And curled up on a blanket near the radiator was Luz, a gray cat, 14 years old, sleeping, at least until she heard the door. One eye opened, then the other. The cat stretched slowly, as if waking required careful consideration. Margit smiled, "Good evening." Luz responded with a quiet sound. Not quite a greeting, not quite a complaint, something in between. The cat approached with all the dignity she believed she deserved, which was considerable. Margit removed her coat, placed her keys on the table, then bent down to stroke the cat. Luz immediately began purring. The apartment felt warmer already outside. A breeze moved through the street. Inside, everything remained calm. Margit prepared a cup of tea. It was a ritual now. Tea after work, every evening. For years, she carried the cup to the window and sat down. From here, she could see part of the city. A few rooftops, a church tower, several glowing street lamps. The river beyond, Salzburg looked different from above. Smaller somehow, gentler. The city seemed to breathe more slowly at night. Luz jumped onto the chair beside her, claiming her usual place. Margit looked at the photographs standing on the shelf nearby. Her mother, an old summer trip, a group of friends many years younger than they were now. Time moved quietly, like the river. Most days people barely noticed it. Then one day they looked at an old photograph and realized entire years had passed. Margit took a sip of tea. The room remained warm. The cat purred beside her. The city rested beneath the stars. And for the first time all day, there was absolutely nothing she needed to do. No customers, no deliveries, no responsibilities. Only this moment, this chair, this cup of tea, this peaceful November night. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. Outside, a church bell sounded in the distance. The hour was growing late. Tomorrow would arrive soon enough, but not yet. For now, Salzburg slept. and so did the stories, waiting quietly on their shelves until morning. The tea had grown cooler. Luz remained curled beside the window. Outside, the city rested beneath a clear sky. The rain clouds were gone. Only a few stars remained visible above Salzburg. Margit set her cup down and glanced toward a small wooden cabinet near the wall. For a moment she simply looked at it. Then she stood, opened the drawer, and removed an old box. The wood was dark with age, the corners worn smooth. She had owned it for many years, longer than she could easily remember. Her mother had kept it first, then it became hers. Inside rested dozens of photographs, not arranged in any particular order, not organized by year or by event, just memories gathered together, moments preserved, small fragments of lives already lived. Margit carried the box to her chair. Luz opened one eye, observed the activity, then decided it was not important enough to interrupt her nap. Margit smiled. Some things never changed. She lifted the first photograph. A summer afternoon. A picnic near a lake. Friends she had not seen in years. Young faces, bright sunlight, carefree smiles. The picture captured a moment that had lasted only seconds, yet somehow it survived decades. That always fascinated her. Entire years disappeared, entire conversations vanished, yet a single photograph remained. Patiently waiting, she set it aside, picked up another. This one showed the bookstore. Not the bookstore she knew today. An older version, different signs, different window displays, different shelves visible through the glass, and standing beside the entrance was her mother, young, confident, smiling at the camera. Margit found herself smiling too. Her mother always looked busy, even in photographs, as though she had paused her work for only a moment before returning to it. The image transported her backward through time, back to afternoons spent doing homework behind the counter, back to rainy Saturdays among the shelves, back to winters when snow covered the city for weeks. She remembered customers removing heavy coats, the smell of wet wool, the warmth inside the bookstore, the sound of pages turning. Some memories faded, others remained astonishingly clear. She picked up another photograph. This one showed herself, perhaps 20 years old, standing beside a train, a backpack slung over one shoulder, ready to leave Salzburg for the first time. She remembered that day perfectly, the excitement, the uncertainty, the belief that life was waiting somewhere else. Many people feel that way when they are young. They imagine happiness exists just beyond the horizon, in another city, another country, another future, and sometimes it does. At least for a while, Margit had traveled, lived elsewhere, seen different places, met wonderful people, yet somehow Salzburg had always remained part of her, like a favorite chapter in a beloved book, one she returned to again and again. The photographs continued: birthdays, journeys, family dinners, ordinary afternoons, nothing extraordinary, and yet everything important. The older she became, the more she appreciated ordinary moments. Grand events appeared only occasionally. Life itself happened in between, inside kitchens, along familiar streets, across dinner tables, inside bookstores. Luz stretched and jumped into her lap. The movement startled her slightly. Then she left softly. The cat settled immediately, apparently satisfied with her choice. Margit looked toward the window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Quiet, peaceful, unhurried, just like the photographs, just like the memories. Just like this evening, she carefully returned the pictures to the wooden box. Now, decades later, she understood something she hadn't understood at 20. Life rarely unfolds according to plans, and that was not necessarily a bad thing. Many of the most important moments arrived unannounced. A conversation, a friendship, a decision made on an ordinary afternoon. A bookstore inherited from a mother. The small things often shaped everything that followed. She remembered something her mother once told her. They had been closing the bookstore together. Many years ago, Margit had been worried about the future, about choosing the right path, making the right decisions, avoiding mistakes. Her mother listened quietly, then smiled and said something simple. You don't have to know the whole story. Margit had frowned. What do you mean? Her mother locked the door and slipped the key into her pocket. You only need to know the next page. At the time, the answer seemed frustrating. Too simple, too vague. Now she thought it might have been one of the wisest things she had ever heard. Nobody knew the whole story. Not really. Not at 20. Not at 40. Not even at 67. People simply turned pages, one at a time, day after day, year after year. Eventually a life appeared outside. A gentle breeze moved through the city. Clouds drifted slowly across the stars. The church tower in the distance stood dark against the night sky, unchanged, or at least appearing unchanged. That was the illusion of old things. The tower had changed. The river had changed. The city had changed. Even the mountains changed, though slowly. Everything changed. The secret was learning to change with it. Margit smiled softly. Perhaps that was what books taught better than anything else. Every story moved forward. Every chapter ended. Every character grew older, yet somehow the story remained beautiful because of it. Not despite it, because of it. Luz shifted slightly and continued sleeping. The clock ticked on. The city remained quiet, and Margit felt a familiar sense of gratitude. Not for extraordinary things, not for great achievements, simply for this evening, for the bookstore, for the memories, for the people she had known, for the life she had been given. Sometimes gratitude arrived quietly, like rain against a window, like a page turning, like the passing of time itself. She looked one final time toward the city lights, then stood. The day was ending. Another would begin tomorrow, as it always did. And somehow that thought felt comforting, not sad, not frightening. Comforting, like reaching the end of a favorite chapter and knowing there was still one more left to read. Margit crossed the apartment slowly. Luz followed for a few steps, then decided the chair by the window was too comfortable to abandon. The cat turned twice in a circle, curled into a gray ball, and immediately fell asleep again. Margit smiled. Some creatures had mastered the art of contentment. The apartment was quiet now, the kind of quiet that arrives only late at night, after the conversations have ended, after the streets have emptied, after the day finally releases its hold. She paused beside the bookshelf near her bedroom. Not the large shelves from the bookstore, just a few personal favorites, books she returned to again and again. Some people watched the same films every year, others listened to the same songs. Margit reread books, not because she had forgotten them, because she enjoyed meeting them again, like old friends. A familiar story was never exactly the same. A different age brought a different perspective. A different year revealed a different meaning. The books remained unchanged. The reader did not. She gently touched one worn spine, then another. Many had traveled with her through different chapters of life. Through uncertainty, through happiness, through loss, through ordinary years that eventually became precious memories. Outside, the city slept beneath a sky slowly clearing of clouds. Moonlight reflected faintly across rooftops. The river continued its endless journey through Salzburg. Just as it had yesterday, just as it would tomorrow. Margit walked back toward the window, one final look that had become a habit over the years. A quiet goodnight to the city. The lights were fewer now. Most windows had gone dark. Most people were asleep. Only a handful of glowing squares remained visible in the distance. Someone reading, someone working, someone perhaps looking out at the same night sky. The thought pleased her. Cities often felt enormous during the day. Yet at night they became collections of small stories. Separate lives connected by the same streets, the same river, the same stars overhead. Margit remembered something a customer once said. Many years ago, an elderly teacher, a man who bought history books almost every month. One evening he stood at the counter and looked around the bookstore. Then he smiled. People think history is made of great events. Margit remembered asking what he meant. The teacher glanced toward the shelves. Most history is ordinary days. At the time she hadn't fully understood. Now she did. History wasn't only wars, or kings, or famous names. History was also small apartments, bookstores, evening walks, cups of tea, conversations between strangers, the quiet moments that rarely appeared in books, yet somehow mattered most. A gentle tiredness settled over her, the pleasant kind, the kind that arrives after a good day. Not a remarkable day, not a dramatic day, simply a good one. The bookstore had opened, customers had come and gone, books had found new homes. The city had lived another ordinary day, and now the day was complete. Margit switched off the final lamp beside the window. The room darkened. Moonlight replaced the warm glow. Soft, silver, peaceful. For a moment she stood completely still, listening. The clock, the distant city, the quiet breathing of a sleeping cat. Nothing more, nothing less, and somehow it felt perfect. She wished her mother could see the bookstore now, the shelves, the customers, the little traditions that continued after all these years. Perhaps, in some way, she could. Perhaps every place carried something of the people who had loved it, just as books carried traces of the people who had read them. Margit liked that thought. It felt right. She closed the curtains halfway, looked once more toward the sleeping city, and whispered softly, "Good night." The words disappeared into the darkness. The city offered no reply. None was needed. Salzburg continued resting beneath the stars. The river continued flowing. The bookstore waited quietly for morning, and somewhere among thousands of books, thousands of stories rested patiently on their shelves, waiting for new readers, waiting for new memories, waiting for another ordinary day. A day that would seem unimportant while it happened, yet one day become part of a life worth remembering. And with that thought, the night settled gently around the city. The lights faded, the streets grew still, and the story